The sky hadn't just opened up, it had declared war. The rain was a relentless, vertical weight, hammering against the pavement of the suburbs with a rhythmic ferocity that seemed designed to drown out any sound of protest. I stood on the curb, the cold water already finding its way through the seams of my worn-out sneakers. Behind me, the sound of the front door slamming was still ringing in my ears. A sharp, final crack that signaled the end of my life as a son, a student, and a resident of that house. My stepfather hadn't raised his voice. That was the worst part. There was no theatrical argument, no dramatic exchange of insults. There was only the cold, clinical efficiency of a man taking out the trash. He had simply handed me my backpack, the straps frayed and the zipper sticking, and told me that my presence was no longer a required part of his household. My mother hadn't even looked up from the table. She had stared at her coffee as if the steam rising from the mug was the most interesting thing in the world. At 17, I was officially a ghost. Before we dive into the heart of this mystery, I want to invite you to join our journey by subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment below. Tell me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's get into the story. The night I was exiled, I had nowhere to turn. I didn't have a network of friends with spare rooms or aunts who would take me in with a warm meal and a sympathetic ear. My social circle had withered years ago, largely due to the suffocating atmosphere of my home life. My phone, a cracked screen relic of better times, buzzed in my pocket with a 12% battery warning, a glowing countdown to total isolation. I walked for what felt like hours, my hoodie becoming a heavy, sodden weight against my skin. The rain was so thick it blurred the streetlights into hazy orbs of orange and white. Eventually, the suburban sidewalks gave way to the industrial fringe of town, a place of chain-link fences, gravel lots, and the kind of businesses that only seem to exist in the peripheral vision of the world. I finally collapsed onto a damp concrete curb outside an aging gas station. The neon sign above the pumps hummed with a sickly, buzzing vibration, flickering as if it were gasping for air. I pulled my knees to my chest, trying to tuck my chin into the collar of my shirt to preserve the fading warmth of my breath. That's when I saw it. Parked at the far edge of the lot, near a cluster of overflowing dumpsters and a stack of discarded pallets, was a rusted hulking shadow of a vehicle. It was an RV, though calling it that felt like an insult to the word recreational. It was a patchwork of oxidation and peeling white paint, looking like it had been dragged through a swamp and then left to bake in the sun for a decade. One of the side windows was taped over with yellowed plastic, and the tires were surrendered to the mud, half buried as if the earth were slowly trying to reclaim the metal. Taped to the inside of the cracked windshield was a piece of cardboard with 3 words scrawled in thick, bleeding black marker, "For sale, $10. I actually let out a dry, hacking laugh. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my entire net worth. A crumpled $5 bill, 3 singles, and a handful of damp coins. $9 and change. I looked at the RV, then at the money, then back at the RV. It was a ruin, a piece of junk that no sane person would touch. But it was also a roof. You looking to buy, or just staring at the ghost? The voice startled me. A man had stepped out from behind the vehicle. He was wearing a jacket that looked like it was held together by grease and stubbornness. His eyes were deep-set, framed by a web of wrinkles that suggested he'd spent his life looking at things he'd rather forget. "Does it even run?" I asked, my voice cracking from the cold. The man shrugged, a slow movement that seemed to take a lot of effort. "Sometimes. If the battery is in a good mood and the stars align, she might turn over. But mostly, she just sits. She's a shelter, kid. Nothing more, nothing less. I didn't need a vehicle. I didn't have a destination. I just needed a place where the rain couldn't touch me. I have $9, I said, holding out my hand. It's everything I have in the world. The man looked at my hand, then at my face. He saw the soaked clothes, the shivering shoulders, and the look of a person who had reached the absolute end of their rope. He sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of his own history. Keep your coins, kid. Give me the $8. Consider the dollar a discount for the smell. He took the crumpled bills and reached into his pocket, producing a single, tarnished brass key on a ring made of wire. As he pressed it into my palm, his grip lingered. His expression shifted from indifference to something sharp and unsettling. One thing, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the sound of the rain. There's a door in the back. Deep in the hallway. It's been locked since before I found this rig. Don't go trying to pry it open. Some things are better left behind a lock. Before I could ask him what he meant, he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the gas station, leaving me alone with my $9 sanctuary. I climbed inside, the door groaning on its hinges with a scream of metal on metal. The interior was worse than the outside. The air was a thick soup of dust, stagnant moisture, and the metallic tang of old rust. Wires hung like vines from the ceiling, and the linoleum floor was cracked into 1,000 jagged islands. But it was dry. I dropped my backpack on a bench seat where the foam was spilling out like a wound. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the rain drum against the thin metal roof. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard, because for the first time in my life, I was the master of my own four walls, however broken they were. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I looked toward the rear of the vehicle. A narrow hallway led past a cramped kitchenette toward the back bedroom area. And there, at the very end, was the door. It didn't match the rest of the interior. While the cabinets were made of cheap, peeling wood grain laminate, this door was solid, heavy-duty industrial metal. It was a dull, matte gray, with a reinforced frame that looked like it belonged in a laboratory or a vault. There was no handle, just a high-security keyhole and a series of deep, violent scratches around the lock, as if someone had spent hours trying to force it with a crowbar and failed. I walked toward it, my heart beginning to thud against my ribs. As I got closer, the air seemed to grow colder. I reached out and touched the surface. It wasn't just cold, it felt vibrationally still, as if the metal were absorbing all the energy in the room. "What are you hiding?" I whispered. There was no answer, only the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the RV's siding. I stepped back, the man's warning echoing in my mind. I told myself to ignore it. I had bigger problems. I had no food. I had no money. I had no future. I needed to survive the night before I could worry about a locked door. I retreated to the front, pulling out the one thing I had salvaged from my life, an old, dog-eared photograph of my father. He had died when I was 10 in a car accident that the police described as unavoidable. He had been a quiet man, a tinkerer who spent his nights in the garage working on machines I never understood. Looking at his face in the dim light of the RV, I felt a strange sense of irony. He always told me that the most valuable things in life were often hidden in the things other people threw away. I didn't know it yet, but my father hadn't just died. He had been erased. And the RV I was sitting in wasn't a coincidence. It was a legacy. The next morning, the adrenaline of being homeless had faded into the dull ache of hunger. I spent the day walking the industrial district, begging for any kind of manual labor. I ended up at a scrapyard, spending 8 hours hauling rusted engine blocks and sorting copper wire for $20 and a sandwich that tasted like cardboard and heaven. When I returned to the RV that evening, the sanctuary felt different. I began to clean, driven by a need to reclaim the space. I tore out the rotted curtains and scrubbed the grime off the dashboard. It was while I was cleaning out a cabinet beneath the sink that I found the false panel. It was a thin sheet of plywood, held in place by a single, hidden screw. I pried it back and found a small, weather-beaten metal box. I sat on the floor and opened it. Inside were no riches, no gold, no stacks of cash. There were only papers. But as I began to read through them, my breath hitched in my throat. These weren't random documents. They were technical schematics, blueprints for high-frequency transmitters, and legal contracts. And every single page bore my father's signature. The dates on the documents were from the months leading up to his death. There were handwritten notes in the margins, his handwriting. He spoke of a company called Byrex Global, and a project titled Holocore. One note, written in frantic, jagged script, was circled in red: "They think they can control the frequency. They don't know what they've unlocked. If I don't make it, the key stays in the rig." The rig. I looked back at the metal door at the end of the hallway. My father hadn't fixed things for neighbors, he had been an engineer for a global conglomerate. And he had been hiding something. This RV wasn't just a piece of junk, it was a vault he had built to protect the truth. I realized then that the accident hadn't been an accident at all. My father had been silenced because he refused to let Byrex use his work. And somehow, through a series of events I couldn't yet fathom, the RV had found its way back to me. Or perhaps, I had been guided to it. The curiosity was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just a homeless kid anymore. I was the son of a man who had been murdered for his integrity, and I was standing inside his final fortress. I grabbed a heavy tire iron from the storage compartment under the driver's seat. I walked to the back of the RV. The air felt like ice. I didn't hesitate this time. I jammed the tip of the iron into the gap between the metal door and the frame and threw my entire weight against it. The RV rocked on its suspension. The metal groaned, a sound of agonizing stress. I struck again. And again. I poured all my anger, all my grief, and all the bitterness of being thrown out into the rain into every blow. Crack. The internal locking mechanism, weakened by years of neglect or perhaps designed to fail under enough pressure, finally snapped. The door didn't just open, it hissed as air pressure equalized. I stepped inside. The back room wasn't a bedroom. It was a compact, high-tech laboratory. Servers, though silent and dark, lined the walls. In the center of the room was a small, reinforced workstation with a single, custom-built computer terminal. Next to the terminal was a small, silver suitcase and a single, handwritten envelope with my name on it. Ronnie. My hands shook as I opened it. If you are reading this, it means they found me, but they didn't find the rig. Byrex isn't building a communication network. They're building a weapon, a way to manipulate the very biological frequencies of the people using their tech. I've encrypted the master codes and stored them on the drive in the suitcase. This is the only way to stop them. They will come for you, Ronnie. Not because of who you are, but because of whose son you are. Finish what I started. Don't let them win. As I finished the last line, a chill that had nothing to do with the air temperature washed over me. I looked out the small, reinforced porthole window of the back room. 2 black SUVs had just pulled into the gravel lot. They didn't have license plates. The doors opened, and men in sharp, identical suits stepped out. One of them held a tablet, his eyes scanning the area with a clinical, predatory focus. They were already here. I didn't panic. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange, crystalline clarity. I grabbed the silver suitcase and the papers. I didn't have a weapon, but I had the one thing these men feared more than anything, the truth. I didn't wait for them to knock. I slipped out of the emergency escape hatch in the roof of the RV, dropping silently into the mud behind a stack of pallets. I watched from the shadows as they forced the front door open. I heard their shouts of frustration when they realized the metal door had been breached. I saw the leader of the group, a man with silver hair and a face like carved granite. He stepped out of the RV, holding my father's photograph which I had left on the dashboard. He looked around the lot, his eyes landing on the pallets where I was hiding. He didn't look angry. He looked certain. He gave a small, chilling smile, as if this were all just a game he had already won. I gripped the handle of the suitcase. My dad was right. They were coming for me. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought I was just a kid with $9 and nowhere to go. They didn't realize that I was now the guardian of the only thing that could destroy them. I turned and vanished into the rain, moving toward the city lights. The sanctuary was gone, but the mission had just begun. If you were in my shoes, standing in the rain with the world's most dangerous secret in your hands, would you run and hide, or would you use that secret to burn the whole system down? Let me know in the comments.